All right, Rabotai. Erev Shabbat Kodesh, Rosh Chodesh Tov Meborach. Time is short. And we'll just say a few introductory words to the new Sefer that we're beginning. And that, of course, is Sefer Bamidbar. Although the name of the book is called Sefer HaPikudim. Every book has a name, and we call the book of Bamidbar Sefer HaPikudim. If you look in the English, it's called Numbers. Numbers is not Bamidbar. Numbers is more thematic. It's the theme that we see in the book. Actually, there's two censuses that take place in the book. One is right in the beginning where God counts the people. And then towards the end of the book in Parashat Pinchas, we see once again Borei Olam counts the people. So hence, they call it Sefer HaPikudim. Although, I wouldn't have called it that. I'm not saying it's bad marketing, but there's so many other things that happen in the book of Bamidbar. The census seems like an incidental item. It happens to be there's two countings of the Jewish people, but you have the spies, you have the situation of the Kilalot and the Berachot of Bil'am. I mean, you have major episodes of the Slav, the Mitonenim, you have the Be'er Miriam. I mean, what don't you have in Bamidbar? You know, the Parashiot of the Para Aduma, Korach's mutiny against Moshe. A lot of major, Pinchas, exactly, with Zimri. So you have a lot of major stuff. Every week is another episode. And what catches the attention of the Hachamim is Pikudim. As if that's some sort of, if you want to synthesize it to its essence, it's those two countings. But I came this morning, in the short time that we have, is to explain what is the significance of these two countings. So I found an interesting midrash. The midrash says, actually the 5 books that we have in the Torah were alluded to early on in page 1 of Bereshit. We know that the Torah is compared to Or. Kiner mitzvah v'Torah Or. Torah is light. And when God created the light, you could go to right in the beginning in the Pesukim. Pasuk Gimal. Vayomer Elohim yehi Or. Vahi Or. Vayar Elohim et ha'or ki tov. Vayavdel Elohim ben ha'or u'ben ha'choshech. Vayikra Elohim na'or yom. V'la'choshech kara layla. In those 2 Pesukim, or 3 Pesukim, you see the word Or written no less than 5 times. And the Midrash says each Or corresponds one of the Chomashim of the Torah. So therefore, Yehi Or, that would be Bereshit. Vayhi Or, that'll be Shemot. Now, I'll explain to you, even though that's not my purpose, explain to you, but I could go through each one of the Ors and explain to you how it connects to that Sefer. Yehi Or is something of futuristic. Vayhi is, and it was. If you understand the way Bereshit and Shemot relate to each other, Bereshit is what we would call Ma'aseh Avot. And then Shemot is already the manifestation of Ma'aseh Avot to Siman Labanim. We would say that the book of Bereshit is the future of Klal Yisrael in potential. The Avot's lives would eventually become our story. And therefore, the DNA, we would call it, of Klal Yisrael is in the book of Bereshit. All those stories are very, very private stories, but eventually become very public. It becomes, an individual story becomes the story of our nation. And therefore, we could say that in Bereshit, it's Yehi Or. It's the future in a microcosm. Once already we start Shemot, Vahi Or. That Or that came out in a small amount in Bereshit, and the Avot would eventually come out in Shemot in our nation. For example, Abraham Avinu went to Egypt, and all of a sudden the Jewish people would end up going to Egypt. So therefore, Abraham's private story becomes our published. And there's many examples of whatever happens in Bereshit would happen again. That's why some of the Mefarshim call Sefer Shemot, we call it either Sefer Shemot or we call it Sefer Geula. The Ramban calls it Sefer Geula. But the Bahag has a very unimpressive name for Sefer Shemot. He calls it Sefer Sheni. Again, if you're trying to sell a book and you say, what is the book? Tell me something about the book. It's volume 2. Volume 2. What about? And that's what the Bahag is trying to say. It's the sequel to Bereshit. Because Bereshit is Ma'aseh Avot. So really, you have to have the part 2 to Bereshit. The part 2 to Bereshit comes out in our story. So therefore, Bereshit would be Yehi Or, and then Shemot begins Vayhi Or, how the Or eventually manifested itself. And then Sefer Vayikra would be Vayad Elohim et Haor Kitov. And that would be that God saw the light, and He said the light is good. Well, the book of Vayikra mainly talks about korbanot, and it talks about the korbanot that obviously brought in the Beit HaMikdash. Hahara Tov Hazeh V'Halevanon. Right, the Temple Mount is called the Good Mountain, and therefore, since we're talking about the korbanot and the service of the Kohanim and all the avodah, so God sees the Or Kitov. So that's Vayikra. But we would need to know the fourth one. The fourth one is Vayavdel Elohim ben Haor ben Hachoshech. That's Sefer Bamidbar. That God separated between the Or and the Choshech. And we need to know, how does that represent the book of Bamidbar? This separation, this divide between night and day. Where does that come out in the Sefer? I mean, this is really an amazing insight here that we're really getting from early on in the Chumash. We're getting insights into know how to figure out what the main theme of each Sefer is. And if somebody would ask you, what's the main theme of Sefer Bamidbar? You tell them, Havdalah ben Or lechoshech. And you say, well, Havdalah ben Or lechoshech, where'd you get that from? I know it from here, from the pasuk of the Or. The fourth Or is Vayavdel. That has to do with, obviously, Sefer Bamidbar, but the question is how. So the Netziv, the great rabbi from Volozhin, he brings a beautiful, beautiful piece here. And he says the following. There was a big difference between the way the Jewish people existed in the Midbar than the way they would ultimately exist in Eretz Yisrael. The existence that we had in the Midbar was actually miraculous. It was nothing short than open miracle 24 hours a day. The Midbar is an inhospitable place for people. You can't live in the Midbar, let alone to have a nation live in the Midbar. You know how much provisions are needed on a daily basis, logistics. I mean, you take people away, for a wedding, and you're taking them to a hotel where there's food and there's amenities and there's a kitchen, and look how much work is needed to bring 300 people for a Shabbat to a hotel. I mean, you need everything from tea bags to mint to spices to all the different items, the salt and pepper, every item you can imagine. So somebody had to think about that, put it on the list, and make sure you have it for 300 people, and you make sure you don't run out of stuff. And they prepare for a 300 people weekend for weeks in advance. And then what happens? They run out of food and something. They forgot an item. They apologize. So that's what happens. And here you're taking 3 million people, not to a hotel, to a midbar where there's nothing. Unfavorable conditions, meaning it's freezing cold during the night. It's boiling hot during the day. None of the rooms have air conditioning. None of the rooms have heat. So you got to bring in now your own heating. You got to bring in your own AC system. There's no bathrooms. There's no plumbing. So you have to bring in your own plumbing, or get rid of the bathroom, or get rid of the need to go to the bathroom somehow. And then you need to bring food. And you need to basically feed 3 million people that have different diets. And you need to feed them 2 or 3 times a day. 7 days. I mean, it's an impossibility. The only way you can exist in the Midbar is through Nisim. That's why Paro had no problem that the Jews are going to go into the Midbar. He figured how low can they survive in the Midbar? And before you know it, they'll be running back to Egypt. And all of a sudden, Kadosh Baruch Hu starts to show all his magic and his tricks. And all of a sudden, you have Ananei Kavod. There's the air condition during the day, and the Ananei Kavod is it's a split system. At night, it turns into heating, and it also served as a press, a permanent press for their clothes, and also served as like a shoe shine that they have in front of the hotel rooms that to shine your shoes. And it also served as David's sling or David's shield against ballistic missiles. So basically, it was a shield against weapons. So a multifaceted item. We never saw an item like this that has so many different, talents. And it also provided them light, because in the midbar at night it's very, very dark. So they had light, and in the day it protected them from the sun, etc. And that Ananei Kavod also was involved in flattening the terrain. You can't walk in the midbar; it's up and down, it's hills. You won't be able to walk. The incline and the decline are very steep. And all of a sudden you have the Ananei Kavod. Basically, it's the topography of the midbar becomes flat. So they're able to. So many things had to happen. And they were happening to Klai, and the man comes down. And even if the man comes down, but it's going to land on the floor. And for the germs, nobody's eating the man. Because now the man has all dirt on it. So logistically, how do you get the man that's going to come from heaven? It's got to land on the floor, but it doesn't land on the floor. So Borei Olam sends down a layer of dew. And the layer of dew is not just a thin layer, enough to get your socks wet in the summer when you walk on the grass. But we're talking about a thick layer, where it was enough that when the man came, it was resting on this moist layer of dew. But now you're worried on the top layer. The top layer is gonna spoil, or it's gonna get whatever. It's gonna get vulnerable to bugs and stuff. Another layer of dew came on top, and basically it's packaged. So you have a package. So you got the man. You have to pull off a layer of dew on the top, and you have a layer of dew on the bottom. So it was perfectly fresh. Hence, we on Shabbat Kodesh, interestingly enough, to commemorate that miracle of the dew, we put the bread on a board, and then we cover it on top. So the bread has something on the bottom of it and something on the top of it. And that's why you should know that sometimes you'll come to the table, let's say, this is more on Shabbat lunch. Everybody made Kiddush and Shul already, so you're coming and you go straight to Hamotzi. So you bring the bread to the table, and you don't think of covering it because there's no need to cover it because we made the Kiddush already. But the Pasuk, no, you have to cover it because you have to commemorate the man. Part of the Hamotzi, part of covering it is for that commemoration. So you don't say, well, we're going straight to Hamotzi. What are you covering the bread for? We're just going to uncover it in a second. You're right. We want to cover it to get the dew on top of it, and then we want to uncover it in order to make the Hamotzi. So that would be halakha. But the point is, miracles of miracles, and then the water, hydration. I mean, where are you going to get water in the midbar, which is no water in the midbar? It's even a bigger challenge than Israel has. Israel has water, they just have to desalinize it, which is to have salt in the water, because they have to figure out a way to get out the salt. This is a bigger challenge. You have to figure out a way to get the water first. Then we'll do that. Do we have to desalt it or not? And what that brings the well of Miriam, which has millions and millions of gallons. Just look at your water bill in your house. You have 6 people living in your house. And look how much water you go through in the course of a month. Could you imagine how much water was needed for 3 million people? Anyway, I don't have to tell you. Nisim, the existence of the Midbar for 40 years, there'll never be an existence like this in the history. Even when Mashiach comes, and Rambam says, we learned last week, the world is going to just remain in Derech HaTeva. So, that's the Midbar. Compare that to Eretz Yisrael. When we come into Eretz Yisrael, it's much different. Eretz Yisrael, there's no miracles whatsoever. Now everybody has a field. Now you got to go to work. Now there's not man going to fall anymore. Now you have to plow, and you have to plant, and you have to fertilize, and you have to reap, and you have to harvest, and everything is there. And you have to rely on the rains that come from the heaven. Limtara shamayim tishtemayim, no more well and Miriam, and you cannot. You're not going to be protected from the environment anymore. Now you're going to have the sun beating down on the farmer's head during the day, and you're going to have the freezing cold nights, and you're going to have to live a natural life. So, big difference. Big difference. Should I tell you a practical difference between the two lives? The practical difference is, you would think that living in the Midbar is easier. sounds like it's more luxurious, it's just easier, it's an easier life. And maybe it was from a certain standpoint that they were free from the chores of life, so they could sit and learn with Moshe Rabbeinu. And that nation that was just beginning needed to have a lot of time to devote to the Torah that was just given to them. But there's a disadvantage of living in Midbar as well. The disadvantage is that you have to earn it. Because since it's a miraculous existence, and you're very close in the presence of God, so therefore you need zichuyot for this. It's merit-based. And therefore any small deviation from the level, you'll be held accountable and you'll get punished. And so it's much easier to live as a human than it is as an angel. Again, even though it might be easier in a sense of comfort to be an angel than to be a human, but to maintain a level of angel reception from heaven, we should be received like an angel. Very, very hard. And that's why in the generation of the Midbar, I just want to point out they were a great generation. I have to point that out because people think, oh, they're always sinning. And you get to the summer parashiyot, and every week is another disaster. It's just like Avera, Goreret, Avera. One just leads to another. And we have a view of these people, they were just, bitter, angry, sour grapes. Every Monday and Thursday they want to fire Moshe Rabbeinu. They're never happy with the menu. They're never happy with the conditions. They're never happy with the accommodation. They're a bunch of complainers. And Moshe Rabbeinu just says, I can't take it anymore. But take all that, what I just talked about, and the Mishnah says in Hakamim Tasa Pirkei Avot, how many sins did they commit? Well, they count them all up, and the subtotal is 10. Now that's not a bad record. You have 40 years, 3 million people, 10 sins. It's an average 1 sin every 4 years. Now we have some of our members that can commit, a much, much faster rate. Sin in time. So you don't need to have 4 years for the next sin. You're able to commit sins, some of them, even some in the same minute, let alone in the same year. So that's a great record. So they were a great nation. And that's why they deserved all these miracles. 1 sin for every 4 years on average. And they had a great rabbi. And guess what? You get what you deserve. Somebody will say, how come we didn't get it? If we had a Moshe Rabbeinu in our generation, maybe we'd be different. And the answer is, it goes together. The reason why you don't have Moshe Rabbeinu is because you don't deserve a Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu only became the rabbi of that generation because the people were ready to have a Moshe Rabbeinu. It was a very high level. But then you're going to see that eventually what happens in the Midbar is that we're moving from a miraculous existence to a physical existence in Eretz Yisrael. So we would say the Midbar is transition time. And that's what it is. And if that's the case, then the best way to depict that, we would say miracles are considered or, because that's where you see the light of God. The light of God is manna. Nobody questions when there's a miracle, where that come from. And then things that happen through the course of nature, we'll call that choshech. It's darkness in the sense that, of course, God is there, but He's behind the curtain. Therefore, you don't see it. For example, in folklore in America, they talk about Mother Nature because they don't know how to call it. So they have to make a fictitious character called Mother Nature, which is the first cousin of Mother Goose. This is also a fictitious character. The weatherman will never get up on the news and say, tomorrow God is going to bring a tornado to the southwest. And that's what it is. And that's what you say. Oh, tomorrow get ready. Mother Nature is going to come. Who's Mother Nature? They have to create a fictitious character to replace the word God. But if it's a miracle, you don't have to praise God. Everybody says it's divine. But the Teva is the concealment of God. And incidentally, we know that the word Teva or Ha-Teva equals 86, which is the numerical value of Elohim. We know that when it's miraculous, it's the name Yud Kevavke that's manifest. It's the divine revelation of God, Yud Kevavke. That represents the highest level. They say that there was one time a story with the Halman. The Halman is Rabbi Chaim Kohen, Alav Shalom. He was one of the Tzaddikim, Nistarim. And one time, even when he was young, when he was 12 or 13 years old, he saw things. He saw things that other people didn't see, only other tzaddikim. So his rabbi was a rabbi called Rabbi Yosef Voltoch. Rabbi Yosef Voltoch was one of the hidden tzaddikim. This tzaddik would walk around with a broom, and he would broom the streets. He was like a sanitation. He worked for the sanitation in Tel Aviv, northern Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, he knew the whole Torah Kula. He knew everything. He was Sadiq Nistar. He never made Avon of the Berit. He was on the highest, but forget about what this man was. They said the 1967 war, it wasn't the army, it was Rabbi Yosef Voltuch that won the war for them, all the tikkunim that he made. Anyway, the Halban was 13 years old, and Rabbi Yosef Voltuch walks by, so he tells the rabbi sitting next to him, which I think the Lullaby Rabbi, he turned to him and he said, this guy's a Sadiq Nisar. So the Lullaby says, how do you know? He said, because I see the Yud Kevavkas on his forehead. He says, and we know that only the Tzaddikim is studying have Yud Kevavka. Everybody else has different letters on their forehead. So the Halban tells Rabbi Yosef Voltoch, you're a Tzaddik, he's a kid. You're a Tzaddik this time. He tells him, shut up, kid, get out of here. What are you talking about? Stop bothering me, get out of here. But then he realized, he said, you see something? And then from then on, he became his Talmid for 40 years. So the tzaddikim, they're able to see, even at a young age, he was able to see things like nobody else could see. When I went to the Halban with some of the people from the community, so some men, so they said, Rabbi, they came to get advice, and so he's looking at them, and he says, they want me to say it in front of you what I see? Maybe you're embarrassed, maybe you should walk out, and then I'll tell them what I see on their forehead. So I said, no, they just want berachot. They don't want you to tell me anything. You got it, no advice. just give a generic berachah. Anyway, it's tzaddikim, they see things. So the Yud Kei Vavke represents, the highest level. So Yud Kei Vavke is Nisim, and then you have Elokim, which is Gematria Teva, represents natural order, and which is the Yud Kei Vavke is hiding behind Elohim. It's like a filter. And therefore, says the Netzi, beautiful. If you want to understand what the essence of Sefer Bamidbar is, it's just transition between Or to Hoshek. And that's what the Pasuk says. The fourth verse is, Vayavdel Elohim ben Or u ben Hoshek. And Elohim is Teva. And that's what happened. They're going from Vayavdel Elohim. Elohim is now going to manifest itself to separate us from Or, which is Maaseh Nisim, to Hoshek, which is Maaseh Teva. That would become the story. And now if you look at the book, you see very good. As we get closer to Eretz Yisrael, towards the end of, let's say, the book of Devarim, we're on the border, then what starts to happen? Then already we have to fight some wars. You have Sichon, and you have Og, and we have to deal with getting rites of passage and all this. That's a physical thing. Why didn't God just put us on a flying carpet and we fly over Sihon and fly over? No, as you're getting closer, so Borei Olam has to gradually transition us into that natural life. That's fine. But what was the problem? What's the problem that happens in Sefer Bamidbar? What happens is we were trying to rush the process. Because since living on a level of Nisim is demanding, and you have to earn it, and that's why you always hear the people complaining. We want to go back to Mitzrayim. Why would you want to go back to Mitzrayim? And it says we ate the food for free. Right? Zacharnu et hadagim she'acharnu chinam. Now, guess what? I don't think the man had a price tag on it either. So you weren't paying for the fish in Egypt, and you weren't paying for the man in the Midbar. So what are they pointing out? We remember the free food. And the explanation is, you didn't need to deserve it. You didn't need to earn it. We fed like for free, meaning like animals. We got to deserve it. Animals have the zichut to eat. Over here, we have to hold on certain madrigot to make sure that the man's going to come down tomorrow. And if we have a bad thought and we have a bad, it's too much spiritual pressure that we're under. We want to go back to being like everybody else. Hinam, you live for either. The goyim have to earn their keep. The reason why they get it is because you give them their food because you created them, therefore you feed them. But living in the Midbar, it's a challenge. That's why they always wanted to go back to Mitzrayim. So therefore, if they want, they have options. Teva is in Mitzrayim or Teva is in Israel. The place that they don't want to be is the Midbar, because it's got spiritual pressure. So they're always going to be trying either to push themselves back to Egypt, or they're going to try to rush the process, let's say, to physicality. And that's why, if you look in the book of Ba'alotecha, Parashat Ba'alotecha, you see something amazing. All the Netziv say. So the Netziv says in Ba'alotecha, the Pasuk writes, on page 786 in the Yard Scroll, Vayhi ha'am kimitonenim. They start to complain. Ra be'oznei Hashem. It says it was bad in the ears of God. Now, what is that? What is that language in the ears of God? Meaning, you heard that. Guess what? Hashem hears everything. So, what do you have to tell me about be'oznei Hashem? To say that the sin in the Midbar will always be magnified because it's in the ear of Hashem. Hashem's right there. So it's like you're talking in his ear. When we talk, we're not talking in his ear. We have to send that tefillot up. But if Hashem is right in front of you, so therefore the sin is magnified because it's not be'oznei Hashem. And what are they complaining over here? They're complaining more about the food. They're saying, we don't want to eat this. We want to have meat. And we want to. So the problem, says the Netziv, was they were rushing the process. And they wanted to get to the physical, and that's why if you look right before this Parashat Betonenim, there's inverted nuns. You'll see in the Parasha, in the Sefer Torah also. And then it seems that these inverted nuns represent a tragedy, that the Jewish people now were leaving what's written before here, which is Ma'asim Nisim. Now they're entering a new phase, a phase that they entered premature. If they would have waited, that would have happened at the right time, there wouldn't have been a problem. Hashem was going to bring them to us. And that's the claim against the sending of the spies. The sending of the spies is not a bad idea, depending when you're going to send them. If you're sending them towards the end, in year 39, then it makes sense. That's transition. Therefore, transition, you need to send spies, we need to scout the land out, we'll go from the north to the south, what's the strategy? But to send spies in year 2, you're early on. You're in year 2, and already they're trying to get to it. What do you have to send spies for? You're living in a miraculous way, but they don't bring you in without that. So it wasn't necessarily the spies that was a bad idea, but it was the fact that they were sending it prematurely, says the Ram. And this is the whole inyan of Sefer Bamidbar. Now, if that's the case, he makes two points. Look at the first census and look at the second census. You'll see two things that are different. Number one, in our parasha, when it talks about in Bamidbar, it talks about the tribes, and then it talks about them, how they were in flag formation. Every 3 tribes had their own flag, and the Torah tells us how they camped around the Mishkan. The Mishkan was the central point. And then you have these tribes that are to the west, and then these tribes that are to the east. But again, east or west of what? North or south to what? To the Mishkan. So the Mishkan is the central point. If you look at the end in Parashat Pinehas, it just counts tribes. No mention in their relationship to the Mishkan, which represents a shift between Or and Choshech. The first beginning of the Bamidbar, when the Jewish people on a high level, Ma'aseh Nisim, all of that energy is coming from the Mishkan. Mishkan is the divine presence. By the time you get to the end of the book in Parashat Pinehas, God counts them again. But already it's just a regular census. And you don't see any more that they're deriving or getting their energies from a higher source like the Mishkan. And therefore the Netziv understands the 2 countings is the essence of this book. It's the essence of the counting of Or and the counting of Choshech. And therefore, Sefer Pekudim is going to be called Sefer, the book of numbers, because it's all the numbers. Look at the difference between they were counted here. This is a count which we'd call the Or Pekudim. And this would be called the Choshek Pekudim. It's a different way of counting. And if we make this observation, we can take it one step further. If you look in our Perashah, let's fact check here. When they're counting the tribes, so how does it start? You got Reuven, and then you got Shimon, then you have Gad, and then you have Yisachar, and then Zevulun. Here Yisachar comes before Zevulun. And then if you go to Pinehas, and you look at the way they're counted over there, so you're going to see something different. You're going to see, okay, we start with actually in the Mishpechot Reuven, and then we get to Shimon, and then Gad, and then Yehuda, and then we have over here so Ele Pekudei Mishpot Levi. I'm sorry, over here. In this Perashah, Pinehas, I thought we're going to see something different. We see over here Bnei Gad, Bnei Yehuda, Bnei Yisachar, the Mishpechotam, and then we see Bnei Zevulun. So again, we have Yisachar and Zevulun. There's another counting. Where's the final counting? Final counting has to be in... Let me find the pasuk. I wrote the pasuk over here. I was expecting to see Zevulun first. That would I have liked that, but I didn't see that. If you look in our Parashat Bamidbar, unless I'm reading it wrong. Yes. Look at which pasuk is that? Exactly. If you look in Chaf-He, it says which perek? Not Chavav. At the end of the parasha. So if you look at the end, what does it say? What page you on over there? Are you on the Roma? What does it say? Read the pasuk for me. I want to make sure that it's correct before I sell this to the CEO. Very good. That's in what Pinehas?
Yeah. No, Mas'eh.
In Mas'eh. Oh, so at the end. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the book, beautiful, that's very good. At the end of the book at Mas'eh, we see that the Torah will put Zevulun before Yisachar. I thought it was in Pinehas, it's in Mas'eh. So the question is, in the beginning of the book, Yisachar comes first. At the end of the book, Zevulun comes first. And then the question is, what's going on over here? So in order to understand that, we go back to the famous blessings that Yaakov Abinu bestowed on his sons, Yisachar and Zevulun, his grandsons. Where was that? That's in Parashat, I guess, Vayechi. So what happens? The pasuk says that they come in front of their grandfather, and Yosef places them strategically, in that if Yaakov will just stretch his right hand out, it'll be on Menashe, and if he stretches his left hand on, it'll be on Ephraim. He's making it easy for his father to give them the blessing. So the pasuk says, what happened? He switches his hands. Again, Vayikach Yosef et shenehem et Ephraim bimino mesemol Yisrael, vet Menashe mesemol mimin Yisrael, and Vayagesh elav. וישלח ישראל את ימינו, ויש את הראש אפרים, והוא הצעיר, ואת שמאלו על ראש מנשה. Now the pasuk says, tell me how you learn this pasuk. סיכל את ידיו. He crisscrossed his hands, כי מנשה הבכור. How do you learn this was כי מנשה הבכור? He switched his hands because Menashe is the Bechor? On the contrary, because Menashe is the Bechor, He shouldn't have switched his hands.
Right.
Why did you switch his hand? But you switch your hands to give Ephraim the main beracha. It should say lo sikel et yadav ki menashe bechor. But you're not sikeling yadav is you're depriving the bechor from what's coming to him. This ki menashe bechor doesn't make any sense. So the question that on Yaakov Abinu is, wait, if indeed you wanted to give the beracha to Ephraim as primary, so why don't you just move them? Why sikel yadav? Just tell Yosef, listen, by the way, I see things that you don't see, and I have to give Ephraim the main item. So instead of giving a crisscross beracha, just tell Yosef, do me a favor, just I do this all day under the chuppah. Sometimes they march the wrong way, the hatam, the kala. The bride is always supposed to be to the right of the groom. The sega shegal liyiminecha. But sometimes, you're dealing with party planners and photographers and other people that have different views on where the kala is supposed to be. So they tell them, you stand over here, you stand over here. I learned from Cham Baruch exactly the way they're supposed to stand, and it doesn't make a difference. And the photographer says, but do you mind if they just stand? I do mind. To be honest, I do mind, yes. What a real answer, I do mind. So anyway, so we moved them, no problem. We don't say, okay, give the ring like this, you kill it, yadav. Do it straight. So why did Yaakov Avinu tell Yosef, the choreographer, just move them around? Explanation is because Yaakov Avinu has two kavanot. He wants Menashe to still be to his right, because he's the Bechor. And to a certain sense, he wants to give him a certain benefit by being to his right. But he also wants to give a benefit to Ephraim. So watch what the Netziv says. The hand of Yaakov will be on Ephraim, but the right leg of Yaakov will be to Menashe. So the leg is Keneged Menashe on the right side, and therefore Sikelet Yadav, and he didn't move them around Ki Menashe Bechor, because he wants Menashe to get a certain benefit of being to his right. And the way that Netziv explains it is that the hand will represent the spiritual blessing, because we bless with the hand, let's say spiritual, and the leg represents the leg. We go to work. The leg is you do your actions with the leg, and therefore you make business. So therefore, he was basically saying you have the beracha of legwork, of business, and therefore you must remain to my right, and you're going to get the beracha that comes from the hand, which is the Torah. So they both got it. Sikelit yadav ki menashe bechor. It's an unbelievable explanation. So now we say unbelievable. In the beginning, when Bnei Israel were in the Midbar, and Sefer Bamidbar, Parashat Bamidbar, where they were on a high spiritual level, where nobody had to go to work, where everybody was around the Mishkan. So when that census is taken, so therefore Yisachar will come before Zevulun. He has to come before Zevulun, because that's what it is. But by the time you get to the end of the book, and you start to see the way we're counting them and listing them at the end, all of a sudden Zebulun finds himself in the primary position. Because now now it's work, leg work. Now you got to go do the farming. So at the end, the bookends of this book, the first sentence and the final sentence, actually tell us what was taking place. Big difference. And in between is the transition. So by the time you're going from, you start the book in Or, and you end the book basically in Hoshech. And that's the book which is hinted in the beginning of the Parashat Bereshit. Vayavdel Elohim ben Haor u ben Haor. Wow. The State of the Union. The State of the Union. Exactly. That's what happened over here. The State of the Union went from Or to Hoshech. Exactly. And the State of this Union has gone to pot as well. Amen.